The Sam Sorbo Show is brought to you in partnership by the Herzog Foundation.
Hi there. My guest this episode is a woman who was introduced to me by a friend. She is no one that you would know of. She has no fame to her name, but she took a stand when it got personal. And these are the stories that we like to tell on the Sam Sorbo Show. So if you're considering what's wrong with our schools, I'm about to talk to an expert. This is the Sam Sorbo Show. Here we go.
Sam Sorbo,
Sam, welcome back to the program.
I'm glad to welcome Sam Sorbo.
It's great to have you here.
Hi there. Welcome to the Sam Sorbo Show. So my guest for this episode is someone that you might meet on the street, but she's not someone that you'll see in the national news anytime soon, at least according to her. She is a dedicated and experienced educator. She served in the public school system for 17 years, from 2005 until 2022, when in the middle of COVID, she decided to give it all up for some very interesting reasons. And so I'm going to welcome to the show, Sandra Garcia. Welcome.
Hi, good to be here. Thank you.
So we chatted a little bit before we got on air, and we can't shut up. We just chat and chat and chat. So I was really looking forward to having this interview with you because you have so much to say. Let's start with just, you decided that in 2022, COVID was the thing. It sort of finally flipped your switch and you went, this is not what this is supposed to be, right?
That's right. That's right. I really thought education was what I was going to retire into. And, you know, one day looking to hopefully to being a principal, even having my children at school with me, I just really set out. It was really a mission for me to really make a difference. And I quickly realized especially after COVID happened and all the regulations and rules and things that just weren't making sense. It wasn't adding up. And just seeing the state of public education, I knew the writing was on the wall very clearly that there's better for my children, and I could no longer continue my mission of public education.
So you were a public school teacher for many years, and then eventually you were promoted to vice principal, where you were no longer a teacher, right? You didn't do both things at the same time.
No.
How long had you been a vice principal before you started to question the system?
So I was here in Florida. There are assistant principals, and very similar. I think it's the same job as a vice principal. But I served as an assistant principal for about 7 years, and it still felt like a mission, right? I still was about making a difference and helping kids and helping schools become better. And I was very passionate about that. And then, like I said, once the era of COVID came in, it was 2021, 2022, and I just, things weren't getting better. We thought, after COVID, we can just move forward, and then not realizing the ripple effect of all of these regulations, all these rules, which I want to think that people thought it was going to do good. In turn, it really caused a ripple effect in our students, and
we really want to think the best of people, don't we?
I do.
We have meant for this to happen. But tell me, so just give me a taste, because I'm not even sure sort of what the regulations were, but that sort of came down during COVID. But literally on another podcast, someone suggested that COVID was actually sort of the vehicle to usher in a bunch of crap, so-called whatever, into the system to sort of muck up the wheels and cause all of this other stuff. Was that the vehicle for DEI and for the gender theory stuff? Was that it?
I think it was. I'm not sure so much about the DEI and gender thing. Was because we're in Florida, I feel like it wasn't as strong. But I will say the lack of education, the quality went down because now students were home. They were on a computer screen expected to interact with a teacher, interact with the learning, But oftentimes we'd have blank screens, right? And especially in high school, it's like I can just turn my monitor off and pretend like I'm following along. And it
Were your
created
teachers
bigger gaps
complaining
in
to you?
learning. Oh, of course. Yes. No. And it was hard because even we were expected to evaluate teachers under that circumstance. And it was for me very difficult because this is not normal what we're doing. And, the masking was a big one, and having kids be 6 feet apart when we put them on a bus, 3 to a seat. There were things that just were not adding up. We were allowing athletics to happen, but we couldn't have Elf the musical in a play at the school auditorium, and just things that, I'm happy to follow the rules, but these rules didn't make sense. So it was
Oh,
very
okay.
hard.
You're saying, I'm sorry, because you're giving great examples, but I want to make sure I understand what they're examples of. You had athletic events, so people gathered, but you weren't allowed to gather for a play.
Right, right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. And so it was just sort of a bunch of just conflicting messaging that was happening, and you're like, how is this? I mean, it must have been very frustrating, especially if you had teachers coming to you and complaining, I'm trying to teach, but the kids aren't even showing up. Like they sit down,
Right,
then they turn off their monitor. I have no idea what they're doing.
right. And also, I called it the governor's pardon because for graduation requirements, they lessened, right? They just the requirements were less because of all the circumstances, right? So then you have kids graduating and not as robust, right? Like
How were they less? Like, I mean, I thought you had to complete, American history and 4 years of English and whatever. So how did they decrease those requirements? What did they do?
there was I don't know all of the details of every single requirement that was
Well, I'm
I
just
can't
saying in
recall.
your school, like what, just for example.
Um trying to think of an example of
I don't mean to put you on the spot.
yeah.
That's not what this is about. I'm trying to get into sort of details of what it was because your kids were young.
Mhm.
So this was sort of an opportune moment for you. But besides that, there must have been some things that, like the athletic game, that was perfectly fine. But no, you can't do the musical
No.
because that requires people to be next to each other.
Right.
Unlike the athletic game where people are next to each other,
Mhm.
even, wrestling, like
Right.
or
No, and
whatever.
they weren't allowed to, like, as if they were on the court or on the field, they didn't have to wear a mask. But
Right.
when they got off the court in the field, right, and then all the stadium members, right, the people coming to the games, they had to they had to have a mask. Everybody had a mask on. But we couldn't do the play, and it just things just didn't make sense. They didn't add up, and all of that, has effect on students and children. And in the long
Yes.
run, I'm seeing like a decay in the quality of education, and kids are not better, especially the younger kids, right? The ones that are supposed to be learning how to read, right? In the younger years, there's like a ripple effect. Even now, I hear about the generation of kids coming through of some of them even have higher anxiety, just in thinking their teacher's not gonna last long, right? Because so many teachers are leaving, right? And they have this fear of like, I have this new teacher, but she's gonna leave me any day now, because that's just what it's become. It's just a rolling um just not having teachers in the classroom because
A rolling
teachers are not
insecurity.
right.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah,
and
I
that's
get that. I
and
I
and and
would
I couldn't do that to my children, right? Like I could put them in a school with
How
what
old were your
with
children in 22?
so I had just had a son, and he was about 1 years old. My daughter, my oldest was 7. And I had oh my goodness, I had a 5-year-old. So 1, 5, 7.
So if they were 5 and 7, just tell me, the 2 older kids were in some kind of preschool or play or kindergarten, or 7 would be 1st grade. So,
Mhm.
so your oldest went through 1st grade?
Yes. So my oldest did kindergarten at home. Ended up because she was offered that was the year 2020 that COVID happened, and it was either you can stay home and do school on the computer, or you can go to school and wear a mask all day. And I didn't believe in the efficacy of the mask. I wasn't going to send my child to be all day in a mask. So I had her here. We ended up deciding to be here. My mother was actually able to homeschool her. And then we ended up the next year, I tried to do public school for my then first grader. And it just, they were still saying that they needed a mask. And I'm like, I don't understand why we still need a mask. There's a vaccine, like people can choose to take a vaccine if they wanted to. There's, we're not living in the just happened COVID, right? We're now a year later. And we believe so strongly in that and the effects that it could have on our child, like the psychological effects of just covering your face, right? Like
but also the psychological effect of being around people whose faces are covered.
Correct.
Listening
developmentally, that's just not good for children.
Right. Listening to a teacher read a book, but you can't see her lips move.
No.
So it's a buh sound, a puh sound. No, a buh sound. Like,
right.
You don't know. You
so
don't know.
We opted. We were there for about 2 weeks trying to work things out so that we could somehow still do public school. And I knew for me, it was also something that God had placed on my heart. And I knew that he wanted me to be homeschooling my children. And that's what really it all boiled down to, is that was what the Lord wanted for my life. And I knew whatever it took, I was going to make that happen because I knew I was going to be obedient to God. And I could no longer, it's like you try to ignore that calling and then it gets so loud. You just are overwhelmed with that, knowing that I need to do this now and move my children home.
But that's a very difficult compromise to make with God, but you called me into this mission work. Why can't you just make the school better for my kid? I mean, I've dedicated my life to school and I believe school. And now you're taking that away from me and saying, nope, not school, not even for your kid, not school, not for you, school anymore. That's a hard translate. I really appreciate teachers who leave the system because they're the ones that are system, right? And they've, I get it. John Taylor Gatto and all that. He left the system after he reached the pinnacle of the system, and then proceeded to deride it. And but it's like the worst non-smoker is a former smoker, because they will tell you all of the disastrous whatever. And you're a former teacher and you're sitting here going, yeah, but not for my kid. And that's what sort of opened your eyes. And COVID really helped open your eyes.
Absolutely. And I've never heard somebody say it quite like you just did. It was it was very difficult. It was a lot for me to just sign those resignation papers. It really, it was almost like I had to mourn that, I have a new mission and the mission that I thought was for me it has changed. You
have to understand that you is dead. Exactly. Mourning is the right word because you firmly identified as that thing. And you were assistant principal with responsibilities. And for you to renounce that, renounce it because you're now going to homeschool. You're not going to a different school. You're not sort of semi-retiring and putting your kids somewhere else or whatever. This is a new you. This is what people go through when they change careers or when they retire from work. It's a big deal. And it's a whole different process of thinking, actually.
And it was also hard because you would imagine how many women around me are in the school system are just no, you can do both. You can have a career and, give your kids what they need. And I prioritize my children. I knew that I needed to be with them and that they needed me to the capacity, that I couldn't give them had I chosen to stay in the public school system, because it was either go back to the classroom or become a principal, and go that route of into further leadership. And it just wasn't aligning.
Did you have a 5-year plan? Okay, I'm assistant principal now. I'll do this for the next 5 years. I think you said you were there 7 years. Mm-hmm. I need to put in my time, so I'll do it for 10 years, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to XYZ.
Right. There's a track.
Yeah.
there's a track that you're on where, they prepare you to be a principal. And then, eventually, the hope is that you do get a job as a principal. But I could see it amongst my colleagues that were principals, like it just wasn't the same. And I could see it, the way that they would sacrifice themselves. I was like, I know that I could do that, but I can't do that. I don't want to do that.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk to you about the sacrifices that you're talking about, because I think we need to highlight that a little bit. And also, I'm going to ask you about the advice that you would give your younger self. So this is the Sam Sorbo Show. We'll be right back. Hi there. So for years, I've been harping on the problems in our schools and the fact that most of our government schools, our factory schools, have been overrun by this progressive ideology that is really at war with our traditional American values, our Judeo-Christian values. And parents have finally started waking up more and more, which pleases me to no end. But they're worried about what to do. They are not sure which way to turn, and that's why it gives me great pleasure to announce my continuing partnership with the Herzog Foundation. So the Herzog Foundation is a trusted source for K through 12 Christian education. They have a really remarkable suite of resources for parents and for families. They have an online publication known as The Lion and a network of podcasts, including mine. So they can offer a wide range of advice and information for Christian parents to make the best decisions regarding the education of their children and the values that they instill in their children. And so if you want to find out any more about this remarkable organization, just go to herzogfoundation.com. That's herzogfoundation.com. Thanks so much. Discover the wonders of biblical history with Biblical Excavations by David Nekrutman. Teach teens to love the Bible, defend their faith, and know God more deeply with a unique collection of educational resources that bring the ancient world of the Bible to life. Visit biblicalexcavations.com/curriculum and use code SAM to get 10% off your next purchase. Dive into God's Word and enrich your homeschooling journey today. All right, so welcome back to the program. I'm here with Sandra Garcia, who is a woman who made it to the level of assistant principal in the school system, where she worked for 17 years. And she decided to leave it all behind to benefit her own children because of the different problems that she was seeing in the schools, but also because she felt called to serve her children first and foremost. And she knew that they wouldn't be served in the school. And COVID was a big part of that, which, I don't think we saw the blessing when it arrived. We didn't perceive it as a blessing. But pretty soon, pretty early on, I recognized, and I tried to take advantage of it. I became a spokesperson for Texas Homeschool Coalition, and we had a whole outreach like, you can homeschool, but do it this way instead of like following what your teacher is telling you, because let's, try to move people in that direction a little bit. That's still my mission. I'm still working on that. And so to that end, I have a different question to ask you. But before I get to that, you mentioned that some of the women who you worked with were telling you, you can have it all. You can have the career. You just have to what? What were they? And I also, the follow-up question is, was it because you made them feel guilty or less than or judged or what? First, how did they tell you you could round that square peg?
It was like subtleties, but sometimes it was direct of like, this is how I do it. And the kids, as a principal, this is how I work, and also make sure like my home like works. And even I would inquire, like, but how do you make time, homework and sports and whatnot. but I never sought out, right, to like make anybody feel bad, or I never hope that would be the case for anybody. But I just, I knew that I had to stand in the truth of what God had brought me to. And once I made that decision to resign, it was like, okay, I'm done. Like this is, and I could be clear on, that this is not what I thought it was going to be, and it's okay that it changed. You know what I mean? And now learning what I know now, I've read some of your book, the it's your kids, right? Making your kids your priority. But education's sort of always been this way. Public education has not. For a while, I felt like I had the rose-colored glasses on, and I was like, "Oh yeah, we're making a difference." And then, as time continued, I realized every level that I was at, elementary, middle, high school, I kept looking around, and I was like, "We're doing the same thing over and over again." That was happening 100 years ago, right? Where we're putting everybody in a classroom, and like we're just teaching to everybody, and then hopefully everybody gets it, and if you don't, here's some tutoring, and just kind of like the child factory, I think is how I see it mostly, is just, okay, let's just move them along, and they're graduating, great, check the box, next graduating class, right?
In fact,
um
didn't you mention to me that you saw kids graduating who hadn't learned anything or certainly didn't improve over the previous 2 years or whatever,
yeah,
and they were just passing them through, something like
right.
that?
And it happens, I feel like, at every grade level. I saw it happen in elementary. Oh, we're just going to pass them through, like, oh, they're not at where they need to be with reading, but let's hope they catch on, because if we hold them back in this grade level, it's going to be detrimental to their life. And then it happened in middle school, right? Like where we would have kids that would
What's
just,
the okay. In theory, the incentive for teachers is to teach. And so if they have a child that's not learning, they would be incentivized to buckle down and make sure that child learned. And they stopped doing that. There was a shift. I'm not sure exactly when it happened. I think it was Race to the Top, but I'm not sure.
one of those programs.
One of those programs that revamped the schools to solve all the problems, but just created more, it seems. So they decided, rather than hold the child back, because and the argument, it's a good argument. Oh, it just puts such a bad mark on the kid. It looks bad, whatever. But the incentive was, if you're not graduating this percentage, then you don't deserve federal funds, right? Or you don't deserve state funds, or whatever it is. Like, you need to keep up appearances in order to keep the money flowing,
Yes.
which is the saddest part, because then the kids are just completely underserved, because it doesn't really matter how they perform. And in fact, we've had examples of the teachers cheating on the kids' tests, so that their scores would be good enough for the teachers to qualify for whatever the funding they needed or whatever.
Yes.
And so you were
All of the
seeing that,
above.
I'm sorry, you were seeing that up close and personal. You were saying, but
Yeah.
this kid couldn't make the grade, and they're
Right.
still passing him through.
Right. And it just, and even through high school, we've got kids that they don't have all the credits they need. So their junior and senior year, they're in a computer lab making up credits on a computer program, just to make sure, okay, we have them, they're going to graduate. And like, after that, yes, I advocate for a high school education. I have at least a GED, something, like, don't get me wrong in that part, because, you can't just not have anything. But I also, it's just the watering down of the education. Like, it's just like, okay, let's quickly get these kids through. There's the quality of education. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of good people in ed that are fighting the good fight, right? Of like trying to help students and making an impact. And I think there are some kids that still come out of it and they're like,
Sure.
My life was better because I did go to school, right? But in general, like, if anyone is considering homeschooling, like, do it. Like, you're not going to regret it.
It's really interesting, because this is a metric that I finally kind of put my finger on, because it was sort of this niggly little thought in the back of my mind, and I hadn't really fleshed it out. And you just said it. I am better off because of my schooling. But are you?
Mhm.
Because would you have learned if you hadn't gone to school? And we all think, heck no, I never would have studied biology. But is that really how you're better off? And so if we really sort of piece it out, And do you know that you wouldn't have studied if you hadn't gone to school? Because the school paradigm really sets you up to hate learning because
Right.
it makes it so onerous and annoying. And you have to do this now.
Mhm.
And you're like, but I don't want to do that now. I want to like experiment with electricity right now, but
Right.
you're not
Right.
allowed to because social studies or whatever it
No.
is. And so, it's easy for us to say, I'm better off because I went to high school, but I actually stopped saying that because
No.
I don't know that that's
No.
true. In fact, I hated learning when I finally graduated high school. Well,
Yeah.
actually, I didn't graduate when I finally dropped out and went to college. But my point is, when we pass the kids through because, well, we have to move them along. I mean, we have other kids coming up and these kids have to get out at some point. So we have to move them along the system and we need to make the metric for whatever the funding is or whatever.
Mhm.
Those kids learn you don't have to do anything.
Right.
So
No, and
we're
it
actually teaching
it
really
creates a
detrimental lessons.
society. It helps produce a society that really just, okay, well, I just have to do the bare minimum. And a lot of those students just hit a wall when they get out in the real world because they're just like, what? I'm just not going to get, my paycheck if I don't show up to work. Because at school I could just like chill, right? I could just not come to class. And you said a few things that I think are also important. Is that I think about how school has become less of an educational institution and more of a social service. And I feel like that has really put the nail on the coffin for ed, because we've come so far and it's become such a bureaucratic tape, and this is how the district does things. We've like It's become so big and so like formatted for all, like the factory, that now we've added in services like, oh, we have a pantry now. We have, a food, like a closet where you can get clothes if you don't have clothing. Like, oh, and even during COVID, like we became these lines where we had to like distribute food to the community. Like it has become a social service.
Yes,
And,
that's
and
one of the
the
big,
priority on being an educational institution is not there. And
right.
I will say that I don't think it'll ever be there. I just,
That's
I
one of the
doubt it.
struggles. That's one of the struggles with, if you suggest we should shut down the school, but where are those kids going to get lunch? I mean,
Yeah.
they get breakfast and lunch at school.
That's a separate need, and like when we talk about, there are communities that do suffer. And my heart, like I worked in a school that it was the first school I was at as an assistant principal. It was violent. It was hard. It was a really hard school. We served a very low socioeconomic community, and those kids really had nowhere else to go. Like their parents were like, "Oh, you're going to school."
Yep.
And we did the best to make it a great environment. And the people I worked with were amazing, like really loved on the kids and try to help. But there were more, it was so frustrating. And I wanted to make it better. I wanted to help. And it was in the long run, who really loses is the kids. Like the
I
kids
just
are the ones that don't get what they need. But
Right,
like, how can we do that as a school? How
right.
can we really do that huge lift?
The It's so interesting because, and this is not anything against you personally, but these arguments that I just gave, that you just gave, were the arguments for prolonging slavery.
Mm,
What are they going to do? Where are they going to go if we set them free? This is where they live. This is where they eat. You want me to just turn them out on the streets?
mhm.
They don't even want their freedom that much, right? Remember the Israelites left Egypt, and then they were like, dang it, it's hard out here. Let me get back into slavery. At least there I had 3 squares, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
so, and this is the argument. We have created a weird kind of a slave system where the parents are afraid to leave
right.
because they've been brainwashed to think master's going to teach their children.
Mhm.
And instead, master's saying, I'll just give your children a hot lunch with who knows what in it, right? And
Right.
chips, or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
And at least that way where they are during the day, maybe,
Yeah.
or whatever. And it's just it's really sort of gone off the rails.
Mm.
My idea, because, and I struggle with this. Look, I think that the best plan, and well, okay, the studies have proven number one indicator for child's academic success is parental involvement. So maximize that, be a homeschool parent and get your child to the best academics possible, right? But education is more than academics. Education is teaching a child how to be an adult, which the schools don't do. And that's why, because the schools are no longer meritocracies.
Yeah.
And so children don't need to perform to advance. They just need to show up, basically. They're graduating not adults, they're graduating children who don't understand that the real world actually works as a meritocracy. Unless you happen into the DEI of the moment, which thankfully, hopefully we're getting rid of now. And we're going back to meritocracy, because I don't care the color or gender of the person who built the bridge. I care that the bridge stands.
Exactly.
Not an imbecile built the bridge, right?
Yeah.
But we are torn because we do provide these services. We have a lot of people depending on them, and you can't just yank the rug out from under people.
Right.
My idea was make all the school boards local to their schools. And if a school district, maybe it's a school district school board, maybe you could do that. But it seems to me elementary schools should, if they want to band together so that they have one board, but I think every elementary school should have a parent-led board. And that way the board is not ignoring the parents because the parents are on the board.
Right.
And you've got recourse and redress because it's the parent of little Jimmy who Sally plays with, right?
Right.
And so you localize the education, and you can have some statewide guidelines or, you know, things like that. You could figure out how to implement those so that they are performing. But the real performance metric is the parent involvement and the parent saying, hey, Jimmy's not learning. This teacher is a bad teacher. We need to figure this out. Or Jimmy's not learning and I need some special help for Jimmy. And let's get the teachers together and talk about how we can help Jimmy so that he can succeed. Right?
Right. Right. And I feel like some of that does happen in the schools. It does. But
I'm not saying it doesn't. I'm saying the state, we've just gone through a period, especially during COVID, where parents showed up and they were rebuffed.
Oh, yeah.
And the schools have consistently over the past decade or so relegated parents to a sideline, like to a footnote. And they don't want to hear from parents, and they no longer have parent teacher conferences and like those we should be having in person because the parents really need to be more involved. You get the parents involved. Now, you wouldn't have gotten me involved because I thought it was the school's job. And so I went through first and second grade helping the school. I helped the school. I helped the classroom. I did the teaching the art, walking the kids to the library, all that stuff. If you had said to me, no, we need you to show up because this is the way it is, then maybe I wouldn't have started homeschooling, because then I would have gotten involved and said, no, we need to do this instead.
Absolutely. And I did have that experience, right? With even the 2 weeks my first grader was in public school, I asked the teacher, there was an activity that came home where they had a mask on the face. They were coloring and it would the mask would come off. And so I asked, okay, what standard is this aligned with? And I was basically told, well, in the future, don't ask any questions, basically. Like, you shouldn't ask, this is to help the community. Like, we're acknowledging that, sometimes you wear a mask but there's all these feelings on the back. And I don't understand what this has to do with, the standards and whatnot. And I was basically told I couldn't ask that question.
But you were assistant principal. Seriously?
Yeah. I was told that.
Because now you're mother. And as mother, you're not allowed to ask that. I wonder if as assistant principal, you called the teacher into your office and said, so tell me about this mask thing again.
Yeah. And I saw that in other, even in high school, there was an instance where a student, wanted to be referred to as a male. And we were asked, an email was sent out by the school one of the school workers had sent out an email and who had met with a student. I don't remember if it was a counselor or who it was, but had met with a student and basically asked us to not share that information with a parent. Like, if it comes up, please, to refer to the student as a boy at school, but in front of the parent to say that, refer to them as a girl. And I immediately wrote to the principal. I was like, this is not okay. We can't do this. Like, we can't. And it did come back, like, it was like, yeah, you're right. This is not okay. But like, we're willing to take it that far. And I was even saying, I was like, how do we know we're not harming the kids in the long run? Like, by playing along with this, you know what I mean? And
But
thinking like, who are we to say that the parent can't know this? Like, oh,
right.
parents don't take it that well. And I'm like, well, it's the parent. Like, why are we having this? Why wouldn't we give them that,
So you actually won that round just for
Yeah.
sort of
No,
bringing it to their attention?
I spoke up. It was one of the workers at the school. It was, and my principal was like, she understood what I was saying. And I was like, you do realize like how this comes off. Like, we can't just, because we can't just play along and then not tell the parent. Like, you're telling me not to tell the parent something that they should know. They have the right to know if their child is struggling socially at school. Like, well, it could be because they might be identifying, they think they're a boy, right? Like, I don't know. Like, I feel like that's something that they should know. And, it did come back, and was like, yeah, we can't do this. We can't just, keep this a secret. Right.
Okay. I need to be clear, because come back doesn't mean to me what I don't know what that means. So they issued another letter and said we were mistaken in telling teachers to hide this information from parents.
It was addressed, because it wasn't something that, if the parent would have called, I would have been like, okay, if something comes up and the parent's asking me questions about their child, I'm going to say something, right? It was addressed in the sense of like, okay, we were told we can't just not say something if we were asked about it, right? But there's a very much like culture of like, okay, what you tell me as a teacher or what you tell me as the counselor, it stays with me unless it has anything to do with safety that your parents should know, right? Like, if you're trying to harm yourself, right? Suicide's the only case, but I'm like, but what about like what could lead to those things, Like, there are things that parents should know about, but it becomes that's where I say like social service, and then you've got the educational institution. Are we teaching, or are we like treating students like, with their mental health and all that? And it became too much of that I was like, I can't be the parent. I cannot be the parent, right? Like, I can't fix this to the capacity that it needs to be fixed.
Right. It's so fascinating because a child who's identifying as the opposite gender is considered, would be looped into transgender. They have a substantially higher suicide rate.
Right.
That would be a phone call to the parent.
Right.
Just letting you know, this is what's going on at school. And I needed you to be aware because they have a substantially higher rate of suicide, regardless of how they treat it. Regardless
right? No, I hear you. And 4 years ago, when that was happening, we were at the height of like, right? Support the identity of the child, right? We those pronouns were like right after when I didn't come back the following school year, it became part of like, I had a mother tell me that in her class, like they made them pick their pronoun. And it was like, oh my gosh, like this is
right.
This
you
is
got
what
out in the nick of time.
Like, thank God I didn't, but when I was saying stuff, I looked like a 3-headed alien, right? I was like, guys, how do we know we're not harming kids? This just started 5 minutes ago.
Right.
Like, how do we know we're not harming kids in the long run? Like, and not like this is something that we need to take seriously, and also not pretend like the parent doesn't want to hear it, or how will the parent react? Like, it's the parent. They have the right to know these things,
Well, I think that's the contentious point, is there are a lot of people who believe they don't have the right to know. They surrendered their children. And the moment that they surrendered their children, they also surrendered their right to know, is the belief, is the prevailing belief, I would say, at this point. Born from an unwavering passion for health, truth, and freedom, Rebel Lion teamed up with the world's leading medicinal chemists to form Fierce Immunity. This groundbreaking formula isn't just an immune booster, it's a declaration of independence to your health. Fierce Immunity is GMP certified, made in the USA, non-GMO, gluten-free, and third-party tested, backed by the Rebel Lion commitment to community, health, and truth. Strengthen your defenses, supercharge your energy, and embrace your inner lion. Visit Get Fierce now and use code SAM to get 15% off your order, because real freedom begins with fierce health. You've got Christian teachers, Christians in the schools, some of whom have stood up. One woman was fired. They literally put in writing she was fired for her religious belief. So she sued and she won. But there, I don't believe, are very many of those cases. And there must be Christians who are teaching in the schools. Do you have any advice for them for how to handle this kind of it's really anti-Christian, because God created them, man and woman, so it's really a very anti-Christian idea here. Do you have any advice for people who are still in the system? And God bless them for staying in the system. I'm not sure how to, if I totally support it or don't, because I think that we still have to contend in the space. And so I do support it, but at the same time, boy, are they getting compromised right now. And so what do you say to them?
Oh, pray. That's the first thing I say, right?
Yeah.
Because, I believe that God, when I called it my mission, it's like mission field for me, right? When I started in education and I moved into these very hard schools with children hurting in a way that's I can't even imagine, because I didn't grow up that way. So it was always about like praying and asking God to work through me, right? And because I believe that God still has people. He uses everything and he uses everyone. So if God has you in a school still, like, pray, ask God, like, what are my next steps? If you have children and you're thinking like, okay, do I leave? Like, how do I leave? And what do I do? What else am I going to do? Like, I will tell you, God always makes a way. And I would describe it as God rescued me from public education, because I couldn't see a way out. And I couldn't understand like how God was going to, okay, I'm going to work and I'm going to homeschool. Like, how is this possible? And I can tell you that it is. And it's only because of God. Right. And I remember back when I was, your book, it talks about like your children are your priority, like unapologetically, your children are your priority. And when you have that lens of like knowing, being firm in your mission, right? Then you can take that step and say, okay, like I'm going to follow you, God, wherever it is that you have me to go, I'm going to go.
You just dropped off there, and I was making a note because you just said something so profound that that God called you out. It was just a clarion call. Time to leave. I got other plans. We're going to shift gears. Here we go. It's still hard to sort of acknowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very hard when you get called out. I remember when so I was teaching as a homeschooler. So I taught homeschooled kids, right? Once a week. And that's, by the way, something that I wanted to ask you about, if you've considered doing that. We had class once a week, and I led a class of 12 students, and I needed to step down. And it was one of the hardest things I did. I felt like I was just shirking my responsibility, but I needed to go do something else. And I sobbed. I mean, it was really like a huge lot, because I had to admit to myself, I can't do everything, which is like really hard for me to admit.
Okay.
So have you thought about that? Have you thought of, I don't know where you are on your homeschool journey with your kids, although I don't know how to show your full background. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to say, in your background, I see you've got the blackboard set up. You've got a little things on the walls like a teacher does, with the little pins in them, so you can show off their work.
Yep.
Right. So I'll let you give us a little bit of a tour if you want, just to show a little bit of your homeschool setup, because it's right there.
It's literally my living room. Like, this is our dining room table, and there's a bookshelf right behind me. And there's also a bookshelf right in front of me where I have my laptop set up. And then my kitchen's here and my living room's over here. So we're like in this little humble house that I love, and we just make it work. I almost set up, we have a den space that it's the kids' playroom. And I almost set up a space with like a formal, like a very formal, like a little classroom, right?
Right.
And I got the best advice from a friend of mine. She said, Sandra, you're going to be on that kitchen table more than you know. So don't invest, in making a pretty schoolroom, because you're going to be on the kitchen table or at the island more than you can imagine. So it's not like super fancy. I feel
But
like
it
anyone,
shouldn't,
and I
but it shouldn't be, Sandra.
mm-mm.
Learning should be organic. It should never be coercive. Like step into the classroom, sit at the desk,
No,
and
and
now you
not all
concentrate,
day. It's a
right?
couple hours. Like, and when they're young, like kindergarten, like maybe 45 minutes, 30 minutes. My kids have like a attention span of a gnat at that age. So it's like it's super quick and playful. And I always say, I tell friends, I'm like, look, my mantra is Jesus and phonics. Like, all I need is like, I need them to know their phonics, because I really believe in phonics. I feel like that's the foundation to reading. And Jesus, like, you pop open a Bible, learn about Jesus, like anything, bring it back to the Lord so that your children can know about God. And as long as they know God, like I feel like, okay, cool. If everything else we can squeeze anything in, math, science, geography, all the others, obviously we eventually get to those, but my priority is that my children know the Lord.
So here's what's interesting. I did Bible with my kids every day for like 15 minutes, like not a lot. It wasn't at all onerous. It was, okay, we're just going to sit down and read the Bible a little bit. And they were young enough where they would stumble over words because I made them read also, because that was part of that was good for them, right? I remember when Octavia was so young and Braden would sit there like, he was tortured because she read slowly. And he was like, can I read now? Can I read? So, but my point is this, it's great that they know Jesus, obviously, like that goes without saying, but the metric behind it, because I love to understand, like, why does this work? The
Mhm.
metric behind it is it's truth. And
Right.
when they know that there is truth, they will be in hot pursuit of it. And the
Absolutely.
hot pursuit of truth is learning everything else, because learning
Exactly.
everything else is the pursuit of God. That's what it is. He created it. And so when you instill in your kids a love for truth and the Bible, which is truth, then they have a love of learning that will never let them down. So we finished Latin. My kids basically hated Latin. Too bad for them. They had to do Latin because it is it's the basis of the English language. It's important beyond compare. This past year, my daughter graduated high school this past year, almost a year ago, right? And last month, she decided she was going to go back and study Latin so that she knew it better, because she never really got it, she felt. And she's so excited because it's exciting to learn it when it's not coerced.
Right.
It's that simple. And so you instill in your kids a love for learning and a curiosity, and then you just feed the curiosity and watch where it takes them. Don't try to guide it too much, because if you try to guide it, then it becomes like asking them to do the dishes rather than them coming up with the idea of doing the dishes. It's a
Right.
completely different paradigm.
Right. And it's amazing how they just we have an adventure Bible, right, for the kids. So it's an easy reading Bible.
Yeah.
And my kids have become like sponges. They just want
Yep.
to learn more on their own,
Yep.
which is great. Like I'm like, all right, cool. And then, that
Great
sparks other
storytelling
conversation.
too.
It's great.
So awesome. Okay. I need to ask you about your education background, because we're running long, but I knew we would run long,
Yeah.
'cause you're great to talk to and your story is so fascinating. What's your education background? You studied to be a teacher.
I did. I started out with a bachelor's in elementary education. And my certification, I later added, after adding elementary grades, I middle grades math, and then eventually educational leadership, which that got me into administration. And I have a master's in ed leadership as well.
So you have a master's in educational leadership. Do you use that in your daily life?
In my daily life, no. I leadership things, yes, even in my role now, but like I not as frequently as I would have thought.
Have you have you uh have you instilled have you used your pedagogy, what you studied in school, how you learned to teach in school? Are you using that in your homeschool or yes?
Yes, a lot of yes, the things that I learned. I think my best experience was with my bachelor's degree with elementary education. I did learn a wealth of becoming a teacher, and I saw the difference in when I was in working as an administrator between teachers that did not have a background and did not have a degree in education versus, one that did. It makes a world of a difference when you've studied education versus when you're just, oh, I have a business degree and I just thought I'd try out being a teacher for a while. It's definitely, there's a huge gap. So I did feel
A
like
gap, and like just define at least in one area where that gap would be.
Lesson planning, classroom management, like those are big ones that you could just tell that they needed, there was a big gap of, you could tell the teacher the difference between the one that studied in education, the one that didn't.
How to plan the class, how to just
Yeah.
plan how they were
Yep.
going to go
Classroom
forward.
management, right? All those things.
Right. Okay. And last question, what advice would you give your younger self?
I like this question. So trust in the Lord. Do not be afraid, and trust in the Lord. That is the advice, because I feel like I held back so many times because I just thought I could just figure it out. I'm in control and I could just figure it out on my own. And I hit a lot of walls, but praise be to God. I feel like right now I'm in a good place. I'm in the place where He wants me.
That's great. Well, it certainly has been a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
All right. This is the Sam Sorbo Show, and I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly did. We'll see you next time. Remember, speak truth, speak it boldly, and carry on.
Views and opinions expressed in the Sam Sorbo Show are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views and positions of the Herzog Foundation.